Keanu stood in the middle of the dealership, absorbing the salesman's dismissive tone with the same quiet patience he carried throughout his life. He wasn't the kind of man who reacted impulsively, even when provoked, because he had learned long ago that disrespect usually said more about the person who gave it than the one who received it. Still, a heavy feeling collected in his chest as he glanced around the showroom. It wasn't just the judgment he felt, it was the strange energy that hung in the air, like an invisible tension settling over him. The dealership was bright, polished, immaculate in its presentation, yet something about it felt hollow. The people inside seemed more interested in the thickness of wallets than the stories of the people who carried them. Keanu instinctively took a slow breath, grounding himself. He had walked into this place hoping for a straightforward errand: choose a bike, pay, leave. Instead, he had stepped into a space where his quiet appearance overshadowed his humanity. Trying again with soft courtesy, he tapped lightly on the Ducati's handle and said, "I'm actually interested in this one. Could someone tell me about its specifications?" His voice remained gentle, but firm enough to imply he wasn't wandering without purpose. Yet the salesman, a tall man with slick-back hair and an ego that seemed more polished than the showroom tiles, rolled his eyes and finally looked up. His gaze traveled from Keanu's boots to his worn shirt and unbranded cap, and a judgmental smirk curved across his face. Without bothering to hide his assumption, he lifted his chin and snapped, "Sir, our high-end models aren't available for test sitting. Look around. Maybe the budget section outside is more suitable for you." The words landed with a dull, disrespectful thud. Keanu tightened his jaw for a split second. Not in anger. He rarely granted anger space within him, but in something resembling sadness. He had spent years navigating a world where people assumed kindness equaled weakness, or where simple clothing equaled lack of worth. Even after all he had achieved, he preferred to blend quietly into crowds, valuing humility over image. But moments like this reminded him that humility often confused those who only respected noise, power, and display. "I didn't ask for a test ride," Keanu replied calmly. "I just want to know the specs." Before the conversation could continue, another man stepped in. This one younger, overly confident, chewing gum like it was a performance. He leaned against the Ducati and said, "Let me guess, you want the specs so you can Google cheaper alternatives outside." He laughed, expecting the other salesman to join him, and they exchanged a look that clearly mocked Keanu's presence. "Look, buddy," the younger one continued in a condescending tone, "this is a premium dealership. We don't have time to entertain window shoppers." Keanu's eyes lowered, not out of defeat, but in reflection. He wondered how many people without fame, without resources, without a voice had walked into places like this and faced similar treatment. How many dreams had been dismissed because someone assumed they weren't worthy of them. The thought weighed on him heavier than the disrespect itself. He didn't need a motorcycle nearly as much as he wanted a world where people could walk into any place wearing anything and still be treated like human beings. Trying one last time, Keanu spoke with a patient but resolute tone. "I'd appreciate if someone could simply answer my question, that's all." But this time the salesman snapped. "Sir, seriously enough, we have real customers to attend to. If you don't have the budget, just leave, don't waste our time." Several heads turned from different corners of the dealership, not because they recognized him, but because the rudeness had reached a level impossible to ignore. Keanu felt dozens of eyes evaluating him, placing him somewhere on their silent scale of worth. For a moment, he felt like a young, struggling actor again, wandering through auditions where people rejected him before he even spoke. But before he could respond, everything escalated. The younger salesman suddenly stepped closer, blocking Keanu's path to the bike. "I said we're done here," he growled, his arrogance dripping like oil. "You need to go." Keanu raised both hands slightly in a peaceful gesture. "There's no need for hostility, I'll leave." But the salesman didn't let him finish. He shoved him. It wasn't a gentle nudge or an accidental bump. It was a full, forceful push fueled by ego and misplaced anger. Keanu staggered back, catching himself before falling completely. But before he regained balance, a third employee, who seemed to have misread the situation entirely, rushed in and grabbed Keanu by the arm aggressively. "Hey, what's going on here?" a customer across the room shouted. But the employees ignored the commotion. They dragged Keanu toward the automatic glass doors as if he were a threat instead of the most gentle soul one could meet. His feet slid against the polished floor, his arm aching from the grip, but he didn't resist. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back. Because Keanu Reeves had learned something long ago. When someone is determined to misunderstand you, Fighting only makes their ignorance louder. Outside, the cold air hit his face just as the two employees shoved him hard. Keanu stumbled, his foot catching the curb, and he crashed onto the pavement in front of the dealership. His elbow scraped the concrete. His shoulder throbbed. His cap fell off. A silence fell. Because the moment his cap hit the ground and his face was fully visible, a passing couple gasped. "Is that, oh my God, that's Keanu Reeves." The realization spread like wildfire. The employees froze, horror washing across their faces as they finally noticed the man they had thrown out wasn't a random stranger, but one of the most respected, beloved actors in the world. Keanu didn't move for a moment, not because of pain, but because of the sudden, overwhelming disappointment settling inside him like lead. Not in them, no, he had seen people like them before, but in the world. In the idea that despite everything humanity had learned, people still judged value by appearance rather than character. And then something unexpected happened. People began filming. Phones emerged from every corner of the parking lot. Murmurs filled the air. Shock, confusion, sympathy, outrage, all swirling around him. But Keanu didn't care about the recording crowd. He cared about something else entirely. As he slowly stood up, brushing dust off his jeans, a strange calmness enveloped him. It was the same calmness he felt in the darkest chapters of his life, when he had lost loved ones, faced grief, walked through loneliness, and still found enough strength to choose kindness over bitterness. This moment, this humiliation, this completely unnecessary attack. It didn't break him. It awakened something in him. He looked at the dealership building not with anger, but with a clarity that felt sharper than any pain he had endured. Sometimes life sets a stage for you, he realized. Not to embarrass you, not to punish you, but to remind you who you are and who you refuse to become. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, retrieved his cap, and whispered to himself, "It's okay." But the world wasn't done with him yet. Because in another part of the city, Sandra Bullock was about to receive a phone call that would change everything, and her reaction would stun millions who believed they already knew her heart. The moment Sandra Bullock's phone began buzzing on the marble counter of her kitchen, she didn't think much of it. She had been preparing a late lunch, chopping vegetables absent-mindedly while her mind replayed scenes from a script she had been reading all morning. Her home was calm, filled with that elegant blend of silence and warmth she valued so deeply. But the buzzing didn't stop. It vibrated again, and then again, each time more urgently, as if the universe was determined to wrench her out of her quiet moment. She wiped her hands on a towel and grabbed the phone, expecting a message from her agent or perhaps a reminder about an upcoming charity board meeting. Instead, her heart skipped as she saw 20 missed notifications flooding her lock screen. Headlines, messages from colleagues, concerned texts from friends, and links that all seemed to carry the same alarming theme. Keanu, dealership incident, assaulted, thrown out, caught on camera, going viral. Her stomach tightened as she tapped the first link, and within seconds the video played. Her closest friend, the gentlest man she had ever known, being shoved, dragged, and thrown onto the pavement like he was nothing more than an inconvenience. Her breath hitched sharply. At first there was disbelief. Was this real? Were people truly treating him like this? She replayed the clip again and again, each viewing tightening a knot in her chest. She watched Keanu's calm expressions, his refusal to retaliate, the grace with which he absorbed humiliation without giving birth to anger. She saw the moment he stood up, dusting himself off with heartbreaking humility. Sandra knew him well enough to recognize the internal storm he was hiding beneath that calm exterior. She knew how deeply he valued empathy, how he went out of his way to make even strangers feel respected. And seeing him treated with such cruelty, while he responded with nothing but dignity, made something powerful ignite inside her. An emotion she rarely allowed to take center stage, fierce, protective anger. For years, Sandra had seen the world admire Keanu for his kindness, his resilience, his soft-spoken wisdom. People praised him online, quoted him, made posts about his humble lifestyle. Yet here he was, still being misjudged, still being thrown aside by people who couldn't see beyond the surface. The thought infuriated her, not because she needed the world to bow to him, but because this incident reminded her of a painful truth she had learned long ago. No matter how good a person you are, someone will always think they can mistreat you if you don't fit their shallow expectations. But Sandra Bullock was not the kind of woman who watched injustice quietly. She had seen too many people suffer silently. And Keanu was not just another celebrity to her. He was one of the most meaningful, grounding presences in her life. Without hesitation, she grabbed her keys, stormed toward the garage, and dialed her driver with a tone so sharp it startled even her. She didn't want to wait. She didn't want interviews. She didn't want to process. She wanted to reach him. She wanted to see him with her own eyes, to check every bruise, to make sure he wasn't hiding the emotional aftermath behind that calm smile he used like a shield. As the car began moving through Los Angeles streets, Sandra stared out the window, her mind racing with memories of Keanu. His quiet laugh, his thoughtful conversations, his habit of listening more than he spoke, his gentle insistence on treating everyone with equal dignity. She felt her throat tighten as her mind replayed the video. Even in the moment of humiliation, Keanu had looked more disappointed than angry, as if the incident hurt his faith in humanity more than it hurt his body. Her driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, clearly sensing her agitation but wisely remaining silent. Sandra leaned back and inhaled deeply, trying to calm the trembling inside her. But no amount of deep breathing could erase the image of Keanu on the pavement. It wasn't just that he was shoved. It was that he was shoved without care, without thought, without humanity. She kept thinking about the look on his face, composed, controlled, but carrying a sadness she recognized too well. A sadness of someone who had endured too many losses, too many betrayals, too many situations where life tested him unfairly. The car approached Keanu's home, and Sandra's pulse quickened when she saw a small crowd gathered at the end of the driveway. Reporters, fans, well-meaning strangers holding get-well cards, some carrying signs reading, "We stand with Keanu." She admired the public's heart at moments like this, but she needed space, needed the noise to stop, needed the chaos to fade so she could reach him. Her driver honked lightly, and security guided the car through. The moment they stopped, Sandra stepped out with a determination that seemed to ripple through the air. She marched to the front door and knocked firmly, not aggressively, but with a sense of urgency. Moments later, the door opened, and there he was. Keanu stood in the doorway wearing a loose t-shirt, his elbow bandaged, faint bruises forming on his arm. His expression was calm, almost too calm, that serene mask he used whenever he didn't want people to worry. But Sandra saw through him instantly. She always had, she always could. Before he could say a word, Sandra stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him with a force that surprised him. He stiffened for a moment. He rarely expected strong displays of emotion, but then slowly returned the embrace, his body relaxing as if her presence dissolved the tension he had been carrying. She didn't speak for several seconds. She simply held him, grounded him, and breathed through the heaviness. When she finally pulled back, her voice trembled slightly despite her attempt to sound composed. "Are you okay? Truly okay? Don't hide behind that peaceful monk expression of yours." Keanu gave a small smile, the kind that never quite reached his eyes when he was pretending to be fine. "I'm all right, Sandy, just a misunderstanding." Sandra's eyes narrowed almost instantly. "A misunderstanding? They dragged you like you were some kind of criminal. You were shoved onto concrete. You were thrown out like garbage, and you're calling it a misunderstanding." She shook her head, stepping inside as he moved aside. "No, absolutely not." Keanu closed the door, leaning slightly against the frame. "Things like this happen. People judge. People make mistakes. I don't want to escalate it." Sandra turned to him, her voice soft but firm, carrying that steady, protective strength she often used when speaking to her children. "Keanu, it's not about escalation. It's about dignity, yours, and the dignity of anyone else who may walk into that place and face the same treatment. You don't have to fight for you, but maybe you should fight for them." He looked at her thoughtfully, absorbing her words. She always had a way of reframing the world, reminding him of the bigger picture. They moved to the living room, quiet, warm, filled with books, photos, and the soft golden glow of afternoon light filtering through the windows. Sandra sat on the couch, watching him carefully. He lowered himself into the seat across from her with that slow, deliberate calm that defined him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that existed only between two people who shared deep trust. Sandra studied him quietly, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way he held his injured arm a bit closer to his body, the faint exhaustion in his eyes. He wasn't physically broken, but she sensed the emotional bruise beneath the surface, invisible but real. Finally, she exhaled deeply and asked, "What happened, Keanu? Tell me everything." And so he did. He told her the story with sincerity, without dramatizing anything, without expressing anger, without bitterness. He spoke of the salesman's dismissiveness, the mockery, the push, the grab, and the fall. The way the world suddenly noticed him only after he hit the pavement. The disappointment rather than the physical pain. And the moment when he realized he wasn't hurt, he was simply tired. Tired of being misread, tired of being misjudged, tired of living in a world where people valued surface over soul. Sandra listened intently, her brow furrowing deeper with each detail. When he finished, she leaned forward, clasping her hands together. "You do realize this isn't just about you, right? This is a mirror of how society treats kindness, how the quiet, humble ones are underestimated until the world suddenly remembers who they are. And that, my friend, is exactly why this matters." Keanu smiled faintly. "You always make things sound bigger than life." "Because some things are bigger than life," she countered. "And some people, like you, deserve to be defended when the world tries to dim their light." He looked at her, genuinely touched. Their friendship had always been built on sincerity, mutual respect, and unspoken emotional understanding. Sandra leaned back, her tone softening. "Do you want to know what the world is doing right now?" He raised an eyebrow gently. "It's erupting. That video is everywhere. People are furious. They're calling it discrimination, mistreatment, humiliation, and you know what that means." Keanu sighed. "Attention." "Support," she corrected. "Not attention. Support from millions who see your heart." She stood up, pacing slowly as her mind pieced together the bigger picture. "Keanu, this is not a scandal. This is a moment, an opportunity to talk about kindness, empathy, judgment, how we treat people based on appearances. You've always lived your life with quiet strength, but maybe, just maybe, the world needs that strength to speak a little louder now." He watched her with thoughtful silence. Little did either of them know that in the next 24 hours, this incident would become one of the most powerful global conversations about humility and humanity. And Sandra Bullock's unexpected reaction would spark a movement larger than either of them imagined. The night after Keanu's incident carried a strange kind of electricity across Los Angeles, as though the city itself sensed an invisible shift in the emotional climate. What began as a short video clip recorded by a bystander had now transformed into a global wave of reactions that surged through every corner of the internet. Social media, news outlets, talk shows, and digital communities were erupting with outrage, sympathy, disbelief, and discussions that went much deeper than the incident itself. What shocked people wasn't simply that Keanu Reeves, someone widely admired for his humility, was disrespected. It was the symbolism behind the incident. It was the reminder that kindness is often mistaken for weakness, that appearances still shape judgments, and that the quietest souls endure the harshest assumptions. By morning, millions had seen the footage, and the world was buzzing with a mixture of shock and admiration for the way Keanu handled the situation with grace and restraint. Inside Keanu's home, however, the atmosphere was very different. The outside world was swirling with noise, opinions, and anger, but his living room remained a sanctuary of quiet reflection. Sandra had stayed the night, not because he asked her to, but because she refused to leave him alone at a moment when she could see the emotional weight settling on his shoulders. They had spent hours talking, not just about the incident, but about life, resilience, and the strange way moments of humiliation could sometimes lead to unexpected clarity. Sandra had insisted he rest, but Keanu found it difficult to sleep with the knowledge that the world had taken hold of a private moment and amplified it into something enormous. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the room through the gentle sway of the curtains. Keanu sat at the dining table sipping warm tea, staring at the steam rising from his cup as though it carried answers. He looked tired, not physically but spiritually, the kind of exhaustion that came from confronting the world's cruelty head-on. Sandra stepped into the room, still wearing the oversized sweater she had borrowed from his closet, her hair tied loosely as she observed him quietly. She could read him effortlessly. His silence wasn't peaceful, it was contemplative, heavy, reflective. "Bad night?" she asked softly, taking a seat across from him. He shrugged lightly, "Just thinking." "About the incident?" "About everything," he corrected gently. "About why things like that still happen, about how easily people judge what they see, about how kindness is mistaken for something lesser." Sandra folded her hands on the table. "The world is learning, Keanu, slowly, painfully, but it's learning. And believe it or not, this moment, it's teaching people something important. They're seeing how you reacted with dignity, calm, no retaliation. That matters, more than you think." He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of humility and discomfort. He was never comfortable being the center of attention, especially not in situations like this. "I don't want to be a lesson, Sandra," he said softly. "I don't want to be the reason people argue online or make headlines. I just want to live quietly. I don't want this incident to become a show." Sandra reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. "It's not a show, it's a mirror. And sometimes life holds up that mirror whether we ask for it or not. People are reacting because they see themselves in that situation. They see how easily anyone can be misjudged. And they see how you responded, without ego, without hatred, without violence. You're reminding people that it's possible to stay human even when the world isn't humane." Keanu looked away for a moment, absorbing her words. Sandra had a way of grounding him, not by dismissing his pain, but by helping him see the meaning behind it. She wasn't idolizing him. She was reminding him of the strength he didn't acknowledge often enough. Before they could continue their conversation, Keanu's phone buzzed with several notifications. Headlines flashed across the screen. "Dealership workers suspended after mistreating Keanu Reeves." "Global outrage as video of Keanu Reeves being thrown out of store goes viral." "Humanity stands with kindness, outpouring of support for Keanu." Sandra raised an eyebrow as she skimmed the headlines. "Well, the world isn't letting this slide." Keanu sighed. "I didn't want anyone punished." "Keanu," she said firmly, leaning back in her chair, "you didn't punish anyone. Their actions punished themselves. You can't stop consequences from unfolding. People need to learn, and sometimes learning comes in uncomfortable ways." He knew she was right. But everything inside him wished the world could learn without anyone suffering, not even the ones who mistreated him. Just then, the doorbell rang. Keanu hesitated for a moment, uncertain whether he should answer. Sandra noticed the flash of anxiety in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of people, but he was afraid of chaos invading his safe space. Without waiting for him to decide, she stood up confidently. "I'll get it," she said, her voice calm and protective. She opened the door to find a familiar face, Keanu's longtime publicist, Ava, holding a folder, her expression a blend of concern and determination. "I came as soon as I could," Ava said, stepping inside. "We need to talk." The three of them gathered in the living room, the morning light illuminating the room with a soft glow that contrasted sharply with the serious tone Ava brought. She placed the folder on the table. "Keanu, the entire world is watching this situation. It's not going away anytime soon. And Sandra, thank you for staying with him. I think you'll want to hear this too." Sandra nodded, folding her arms as she took a seat beside Keanu. Ava continued, "I've been receiving hundreds of requests from talk shows, magazines, nonprofits, advocacy groups. People want you to speak about what happened. They want you to address mistreatment, discrimination, kindness, all the themes this incident highlighted." Keanu rubbed his temples gently. "Ava, I don't want to turn this into a public event. I just want to move past it." But Ava shook her head. "You can't just move past it, not this time. A conversation has already started without you. People are speaking in your name. They're interpreting your silence in different ways. The question is, do you want the world to learn the wrong lesson or the right one?" Sandra looked at Keanu with soft, encouraging eyes. "She's right. You don't have to turn this into a fight. You don't have to condemn anyone. You don't even have to relive the moment. All you have to do is share what you always share, your values, your perspective, your belief in kindness." A deep stillness fell over the room. Keanu leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes for a moment as he considered everything. He didn't want fame. He didn't want drama. He didn't want revenge. But he did care about humanity. He cared about the simple truths that shaped his quiet existence, treating people equally, living without ego, choosing compassion even when it wasn't reciprocated. If this moment could remind the world of something important, maybe it was worth stepping into the spotlight, not as a celebrity, but as a human being sharing a human story. Finally, Keanu opened his eyes and looked at Ava. "If I speak," he said slowly, "I want it to be honest. I want it to be about kindness, not anger, about how people should treat others, not about what happened to me." Sandra smiled softly. "That's exactly why your voice matters." Ava nodded. "Then we'll prepare something, but just know, Keanu, the world is with you." The conversation shifted into planning, but Sandra watched him closely the entire time. She could see a subtle change in him, a blend of vulnerability and strength emerging as he accepted the role destiny had unexpectedly placed in his hands. The incident that humiliated him might end up becoming one of the most powerful reminders of empathy the world had seen in years. And deep inside, even though she would never admit it aloud, Sandra felt something else. Something warm, fierce, and protective rising inside her. Seeing Keanu handle adversity with gentleness only made her respect him more. But watching the world rally behind him, watching him slowly accept that he might need to speak not for himself, but for others, awakened something she had kept hidden for a long time. A growing admiration, a silent affection, and a connection that went deeper than friendship. Little did they know, the next step they were about to take together would not only heal the emotional wound this incident left. It would change the course of their lives forever. The day the world started watching. The morning after the dealership incident had turned into a whirlwind neither Keanu nor Sandra had been prepared for. What began as a private moment of humiliation and compassion between two friends had exploded into a global conversation that stretched far beyond celebrity gossip. News outlets, talk shows, bloggers, fan communities, and even self-help channels dissected the footage that had leaked online. The clip of Keanu being shoved, the chaos that followed, and the unforgettable moment Sandra pushed through the crowd to defend him with a raw, unfiltered intensity that stunned the internet. But for Keanu and Sandra, the issue was never the virality. It was the weight of the emotional truth underneath it. As they sat together in Sandra's living room, sunlight warming the wooden floors and quiet settling between them, both knew that the world had seen something they hadn't intended to share: vulnerability. Keanu was used to keeping his battles private. Sandra was used to speaking carefully, selectively, always with grace. Now, though, the world had witnessed a moment that was purely human, stripped of fame and polish, and somehow that exposure brought a strange mixture of peace and pressure. Keanu leaned back on the couch, shoulders still tense from the previous night, every muscle echoing with unspoken thoughts. He had spent his entire life absorbing hurt quietly. He had learned how to fall gracefully, physically, emotionally, publicly, yet the dealership incident had shaken him in a way that surprised even him. It wasn't the punch that lingered. It was the fact that he had been forced to relive a kind of disrespect he had seen too often. People mistaking gentleness for weakness, humility for insignificance, kindness for vulnerability. And yet, the moment that replayed in his mind wasn't the blow. It was Sandra bursting into the scene like a storm of loyalty he never asked for but desperately needed. He remembered the look in her eyes, fierce, protective, fearless, and the way her voice trembled with rage as she demanded the manager apologize. The world saw entertainment. Keanu saw a friend who had seen his pain before he even spoke it. Sandra, sitting at the edge of the sofa with her elbows on her knees, watched him quietly. She had been replaying the moment too, not out of regret, but out of a deep ache she didn't fully understand yet. She had acted on instinct, on something so natural it startled her more than the situation itself. She had always admired Keanu's strength, the quiet, steady, unshakable kind that many people misunderstood. She admired how he greeted life with humility despite carrying wounds that would have hardened anyone else. But seeing him pushed like that, treated like nobody, judged because he walked into a dealership in worn boots and a simple jacket, had ignited something inside her that she couldn't suppress. It wasn't just friendship. It was a profound respect for the man he was behind the cameras, behind the scenes, behind the world's assumptions. Their phones buzzed nonstop with messages from managers, studios, journalists, friends, and strangers who felt compelled to share their own experiences of being dismissed or looked down upon. Sandra finally turned her phone off, tossing it onto the coffee table. "It's crazy out there," she murmured, and Keanu gave a soft nod. But she wasn't talking about the media frenzy. She was talking about the fact that their private moment of truth had touched millions of people. "You know. People aren't reacting to the fight," she added gently. "They're reacting to what it represents." Keanu stayed silent for a moment, then lifted his gaze with a quiet understanding. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Everyone's been there at some point, feeling small, being underestimated." He didn't need to explain further. The world had watched him get shoved aside, but what viewers connected with wasn't the physicality, it was the dignity in how he had handled it. But more than that, they connected with the universal truth Sandra had unintentionally exposed. Real strength doesn't always come from standing tall. Sometimes it comes from standing up for someone else. Sandra leaned back beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "You didn't deserve that," she said softly, the words carrying a protective warmth that lingered in the air. "I know what people think, that celebrities get special treatment everywhere, but that's not real, not for you, not for me, not for anyone who tries to walk through the world with kindness instead of ego." Keanu smiled faintly. You know, yesterday when you said you hated seeing me hurt, it meant something, more than you realize. Sandra turned her face toward him slowly, her expression softening with sincerity. She had spoken from instinct, not calculation, but hearing him acknowledge it stirred something warm and unexpected within her. Well, she said after a moment, someone has to remind you that you're allowed to be protected too. For the first time since the incident, Keanu laughed, quiet, genuine, the kind of laugh that reveals a piece of the soul. It was a moment that felt like air after drowning. Sandra watched him, relief easing her chest, but behind that relief was something else forming, an awareness, subtle but undeniable, that their bond had shifted. They were not just co-stars, not just old friends who had shared premieres and memories. They were something deeper now, something forged not by Hollywood glamour but by bruises, honesty, and fierce loyalty. Outside, the world kept talking. Headlines multiplied. Comment sections exploded with support. Fans demanded apologies from the dealership. Think piece articles analyzed Sandra's reaction as a symbol of empathy in a world starving for kindness. But inside Sandra's living room, none of that mattered. What mattered was the quiet understanding between them, the unspoken truth that this moment, this bruising, humiliating, unexpectedly powerful moment, had changed their relationship forever. It had revealed how deeply they cared, how instinctively they protected one another, and how much heavier life felt when the world expected them to be strong all the time. Whatever comes next, Sandra finally whispered, we'll handle it together. Keanu turned his head toward her, his eyes warm with gratitude and something softer that neither dared name. The world had seen a shocking moment at a car dealership, but only the two of them understood what it had awakened. And for the first time in years, Keanu felt like he wasn't carrying his burdens alone. The unexpected press conference. The following days unfolded like a slow, rising tide, steady, unstoppable, and filled with a pressure neither Keanu nor Sandra could ignore. What started as a single leaked video had now transformed into a global discussion about humility, kindness, and the way people judge others based solely on appearances. The story refused to fade. Instead, it ignited movements online, with hashtags calling for respect and empathy trending across the world. Yet beneath the digital waves, both actors felt the same quiet tension building inside them. The studio executives started pressing them for official statements, threatening to twist their silence into narratives they didn't agree with. Paparazzi camped outside their homes. Talk shows demanded interviews. Fan pages expressed their love, while critics attempted to speculate that the entire situation was orchestrated. Through all of it, Keanu and Sandra felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. Pride that the world was discussing compassion, and discomfort that their private emotional moment had become a public spectacle. One morning, as they sat in Sandra's kitchen with mugs of coffee warming their hands, her phone buzzed again with messages from her publicist. She didn't want to look, but the vibration was relentless, dragging her attention back to the chaos outside their calm bubble. She finally opened the message, sighed, and pushed the phone toward Keanu. "They want us to do a joint press conference," she said, her voice carrying a mix of frustration and resignation. Keanu looked at the screen with a quiet stillness, reading every line slowly. He had always been someone who preferred to act rather than talk, someone who believed that actions spoke louder than statements crafted for the media. But he also knew that silence could be misinterpreted, especially when the world was desperate for answers. He gently set the phone aside and leaned back in his chair. "If we're going to speak," he said softly, "we speak on our terms, not theirs." Sandra's eyes softened with gratitude. She admired that about him, his clarity, his groundedness, his unshakable sense of truth. Even in moments of chaos, Keanu knew how to stay centered, how to make decisions based on integrity rather than pressure. She took a deep breath. "Okay," she said, "but if we do this, I want it to be real, not some polished Hollywood speech." Keanu nodded. "It should be honest. It should be about respect, not about drama." Sandra smiled gently, feeling once again that their connection had deepened not because of fame, but because they understood each other at a level that transcended public life. Later that afternoon, they walked together into the press conference hall, a spacious room filled with reporters, photographers, and bright lights that felt harsher than usual. The buzzing of whispered conversations filled the air as journalists from across the world lifted their cameras, waiting for the moment to capture something new. Sandra glanced at Keanu, noticing the calmness in his posture despite the heaviness of the moment. She knew he wasn't comfortable here. He had never been someone who enjoyed the spotlight unless it was through his film work. But his presence beside her made her feel stronger. They approached the podium, microphones lined up like a wall between their hearts and the world. With a deep breath, Sandra stepped forward and began speaking, her voice steady but warm. "I know the last few days have been intense for everyone watching," she began, her eyes sweeping across the room. "The video that went viral was not something Keanu or I expected or wanted the world to see. It was a personal moment, a moment where someone I care about deeply was treated with disrespect. I reacted as anyone would when they see someone they value being hurt." Her calm honesty silenced the murmurs instantly. Cameras clicked rapidly, but Sandra didn't flinch. She continued, "This isn't a story about celebrities being mistreated. This is a story about kindness versus judgment. It's about how anyone can be overlooked or disrespected because of a snap assumption. Keanu didn't walk into that dealership as a movie star. He walked in as a human being." Keanu then stepped forward, his voice gentle but carrying a weight that resonated across the room. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of what happened," he said, "but the reaction from the world made me realize something important. Many people know what it's like to be dismissed. Many have felt invisible despite having so much to offer. I've been fortunate in my life and career, but moments like this remind me that kindness is not about status. It's about seeing people for who they are, not what you assume they are." His sincerity flooded the room with a quiet, introspective energy. Reporters lowered their cameras slightly, genuinely listening. "Sandra stood up for me because she saw something wrong, and I'm grateful for that," Keanu added, glancing at her with a warmth that carried an unspoken truth. "But what matters most is what we all learn from this, not about us, but about how we treat each other." Their words created a ripple effect. The room, once buzzing with tension, transformed into a space filled with reflection. Even the most hardened journalists seemed moved by the emotional transparency they had just witnessed. As the questions began pouring in, Sandra and Keanu answered each one with grace, honesty, and a shared sense of purpose. They weren't just clarifying a viral incident. They were using their voices to highlight something bigger, something meaningful. When the conference finally ended, the applause that filled the room wasn't the shallow kind often heard at media events. It was heartfelt, appreciative, and deeply respectful. As they walked out of the building and into the quieter hallway, Sandra exhaled a long breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Keanu looked at her with a small smile, one that reflected relief and admiration. "You did great," he said softly. Sandra shook her head. "We did great." And in that moment, standing outside the noise and the flash of cameras, they felt a shared victory, not over critics or headlines, but over fear, misunderstanding, and the walls that life so often tries to build around the human heart. They had faced the world together, not as superstars, but as two people who refused to let dignity and kindness be overshadowed by chaos. And somewhere deep inside, both understood that their bond had evolved again, becoming something steadier, stronger, and more unshakable than either of them had imagined. The aftermath and the awakening. The days following the press conference were unlike anything Keanu or Sandra had anticipated. The world seemed to slow down yet speed up all at once. News outlets dissected every word they had said. Social media erupted with discussions about empathy, kindness, and dignity. And people everywhere began sharing their own stories of being overlooked or mistreated. For the first time in years, Keanu felt that the chaotic world of fame, publicity, and social perception could serve as a vessel for something profoundly human. It wasn't about attention, awards, or celebrity status. It was about a movement born from one simple truth. Even the most gentle, unassuming people deserve to be treated with respect. Sandra, who had stood beside him every step of the way, watched him navigate this unexpected storm with a quiet strength that only deepened her admiration. She had always known he possessed resilience, but the way he carried himself in the face of public scrutiny, while maintaining humility and kindness, revealed a layer of inner power she had never fully comprehended until now. They spent long afternoons together reflecting on the impact of what had happened. Keanu, who had long valued solitude and introspection, was surprised to realize how much he leaned on Sandra, not because he needed protection, but because her presence made him feel seen, understood, and validated in ways that transcended words. She didn't merely react to his pain. She helped him contextualize it, turning humiliation into an opportunity for growth. She reminded him that the world's reaction wasn't a measure of his worth, but a reflection of the collective hunger for authenticity and empathy. And in those quiet conversations, they discovered a deeper understanding of their own lives. They spoke of the fleeting nature of fame, the fragility of human perception, and the rare but transformative power of standing up for what is right. Every sentence, every shared thought, wove an invisible thread between them. A thread that was not based on glamour or recognition, but on shared humanity, mutual respect, and unspoken loyalty. Meanwhile, the public's response continued to grow in unexpected ways. Grassroots movements, online campaigns, and nonprofit organizations began highlighting everyday kindness, inspired by the incident and the way Sandra and Keanu had handled it. People started documenting acts of empathy in their communities, from helping strangers to advocating for fair treatment in workplaces, schools, and public spaces. What had started as a moment of personal humiliation had blossomed into a global conversation about human dignity, showing that even in a world often dominated by superficial values, compassion and integrity could create ripples strong enough to alter perspectives. Keanu watched it all unfold with a quiet awe. He did not crave recognition, but he realized the importance of using whatever platform he had to remind people that actions rooted in kindness, no matter how small, could resonate far beyond the individual. It was a lesson he had long lived by, but one that the world now had the chance to witness firsthand. For Sandra, the experience was equally transformative. She had always believed in protecting those she cared for, but seeing the way the world responded to her instinctive act of defense awakened a new sense of purpose. She began contemplating ways to actively foster kindness, not just through grand gestures, but by inspiring others to take small, meaningful actions that could collectively shift societal perspectives. The incident had revealed the extraordinary potential that lay in everyday courage, the courage to stand up, speak out, and act decisively when someone else is in need. And Sandra realized that her bond with Keanu, forged through shared experiences of loss, triumph, and empathy, had now evolved into a powerful partnership that could quietly influence the world, not through spectacle, but through integrity and the strength of character. As the weeks passed, the initial shock of the viral video faded, but the lessons endured. Keanu and Sandra found themselves in moments of reflection, walking together in quiet parks, discussing ideas for community outreach, and connecting with people who had been inspired by the events. They both understood that their experiences had become a symbol, a living reminder of the importance of treating others with respect and understanding, regardless of appearances or preconceived notions. And in their private moments, away from cameras and commentary, they shared a profound sense of fulfillment. They realized that life often tests people not to break them, but to reveal the depth of their resilience, the capacity of their empathy, and the authenticity of their values. Their friendship had been deepened by adversity, their spirits strengthened by challenge, and their hearts awakened to the subtle but transformative power of standing for what is right. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Keanu and Sandra sat together on a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The chaos of the world seemed distant, muted by the warmth of shared understanding and the calm of the fading day. Keanu spoke softly, almost to himself. "It's strange, isn't it, how one moment, one small, humiliating moment, can ripple out and touch so many lives?" Sandra nodded, placing a comforting hand over his. "Yes," she said, "but it also shows that every act of courage, kindness, or empathy has the potential to inspire. Even the quietest people can change the world." They sat together in silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because words were unnecessary. The weight of experience, the resonance of shared humanity, and the quiet power of understanding spoke more eloquently than any speech ever could. And as night fell, stars emerging like tiny points of hope in the vast sky, they knew this. The dealership incident had not broken them. It had not diminished their spirits. Instead, it had awakened them to a higher purpose, strengthened their bond, and reminded them that true impact is never measured by public acclaim, but by the courage to be humane, the willingness to protect others, and the humility to remain grounded even when the world's attention falls upon you. Keanu and Sandra had endured a storm not of their making, yet emerged not only unbroken, but transformed. In the quiet strength they carried and the kindness they extended, they demonstrated a truth far larger than fame, fortune, or recognition. That empathy, courage, and unwavering integrity are the forces capable of shaping hearts, inspiring change, and illuminating the human spirit in ways that endure far beyond any viral moment. And in that realization they smiled, not because the world had noticed, but because they had truly seen each other, and in that recognition they had discovered a rare, unshakable power. The power to turn adversity into inspiration, humiliation into humanity, and a single moment of injustice into a lifetime of meaningful change.